The big news of the day, of the week, I think for a lot of folks out there. I know I did the review a few weeks back when it first released on digital. I covered the review on the Kaleidescape because the Kaleidescape should look like the physical media 4K disc, which is Avatar: The Way of Water 4K UHD, which is now coming out on June 20th, 2023, which is not that far away. So now I know a lot of you guys are interested in picking this up. I mean, it is like, what is it, like the third biggest movie of all time? Like, who thought this movie would actually rank at the top five to come in at number three? But this is like the 2022's number one movie of the year, right? But this is officially coming out June 20th. It's going to be on a 100 gig disc. So, unlike the previous Marvel releases, if we're going to compare it to Avengers Endgame, which is close to a 3 hour movie, that clocked in at 66 gigs. It was put on a 66 gig disc. So if you were to strip out all the extra languages and everything like that, I think it comes down to like 50 some gigs, maybe like 58 gigs. If you were just to take the movie straight out of the actual disc itself. I'm sure Cameron probably had a say so in maximizing the quality of the transfer. So they're throwing it on a 100 gig disc. So this should look very, very clean, at least probably the cleanest Disney release that they've had in quite some time. Now, if we're going to compare that to the Kaleidescape version comes in a little over 100 gigs. It comes in at 102.7 gigs, if I'm not mistaken. So this should look very well. The disc should look very close to the Kaleidescape version. So if you were to maximize the 100 gig disc, we're looking at about 98 point like 98.6 gigs or something like that if we're talking about 100 gig disk size. If you're going to strip out the languages and everything like that, you're probably looking at about 86, 87 gigs total. So technically the Kaleidescape version is probably going to be still larger in file size, less compression, but I don't think it's going to be like a drastic difference in quality between the two. Although when I compared Endgame on 4K Blu-ray versus Endgame on the Kaleidescape, because I think the Kaleidescape is coming in about 100 gigs, maybe like 98 gigs or something like that, whereas the Endgame on the disc was like 66 gigs or less than that, like 58 gigs. That definitely has a difference in quality between the Kaleidescape version and the 4K disc version. Whereas Avatar 2 should look very similar, if not nearly identical. So I'm not seeing too much of a difference. I don't anticipate too much of a difference for visuals. And then audio wise, it should be identical because they're both going to be the lossless Atmos mixes for the home, which, if you saw my review, which I did about a month or month and a half or so back now, thanks for watching that, by the way. I got a lot of views on that. But that Atmos mix should be identical to what's on the 4K Blu-ray. So I know there's some folks wondering if the 4K Blu-ray is going to sound better than the digital, which it will. And then is it going to sound better than the Kaleidescape or different than the Kaleidescape? No, it should be an identical because they're sourced from Disney. Disney sends the mezzanine file over to Kaleidescape, and then basically the lossless track just ends up being untouched to Kaleidescape, which is going to be the same way for the 4K disc as well. And yes, it is slightly kind of at-moused, meaning that it is kind of lower in volume from other movies that you might see in from Sony or Warner Brothers. I think you have to, or at least I had to bump up the volume about 6 dB or so, maybe like 8 dB to get it up to the regular kind of like normal reference standard from like Warner Brothers and all that stuff. If I remember correctly, the Way of Water Atmos mix was also largely a static mix rather than a dynamic mix. So for the guys wondering out there, is this going to be a mind-blowing audio experience? To be honest, I really wasn't blown away at the theatrical presentation, and I also was not blown away by the Atmos mix at home, especially the bass as well. The bass could have used a little bit more juice on the bottom end, but I think it's like still capped at like 30 hertz, maybe like 35 hertz or so. where they put the high pass on it. But yes, the bass is also gimped as well. So it is, I guess you could say it is atmoused as well, because the volume is a little bit lower. It is a static mix. There are a couple scenes during the movie where it is dynamic. So if you do have wide channels, it'll activate those wide channels, but it's very rare. There's some decent high channel activity, if I'm not mistaken, as well, if I remember the review that I did. But it is not what I would say a reference quality Atmos mix. Although for the video quality, I would say that is for me, I know there's the whole thing about fake HDR and all that stuff, but on my displays, on my 85-inch X95 and also on the Z NZ8, looked fantastic. The HDR looked fantastic on that. Is it going to blow your eyeballs out with brightness? No, it's not going to blow your eyes up with brightness, but it looks fantastic. The colors are great on it. It's razor sharp. The difference between the technology in 2009 and now, while it might not seem like a massive difference, but if you were to go back and watch Avatar 1 to Avatar 2, you could see how much better the CG is, especially with the textures on skin and the textures on the background, the water effects, so much better than Avatar 1. Not to take away anything from Avatar 1 from 2009, because that still holds up very well today. Still looks better than pretty much every Marvel movie ever released. Avatar 1 from 2009. So, I mean, let's not take away anything from the advancements that happened back then. But video quality wise, I did think it was reference quality video. I think I gave it like a 9.9 or something like that. And also, Avatar 1 is also coming out June 20th, which I believe is going to be just the regular theatrical version of it. I don't think it's going to be the extended cut. Both of them are going to be in the full screen aspect ratio. I think it's 178:1. So it will fill your screens, just like the Kaleidescape and the digital versions. Is it going to be a remaster? I'm sure it will be, because it's 4K. Whatever we got for Avatar 1 theatrically, I'm sure it's going to trickle down to the home release. Although there's not going to be any high frame rate, because the Blu-ray spec does not have 4K 48 frames per second. I believe it only covers 4K 60 frames per second, like we got on Gemini Man and Billy Lynn's Long Halftime Walk. So I'm sure we are not going to get a high frame rate version. Maybe they could use motion interpolation to freeze a couple frames to fit within the 4K 60 wrapper. I mean, maybe that's a possibility without getting any kind of weird motion artifacts. I don't know. I mean, that's a possibility, I suppose, but I know we're not going to get any high frame rate for the 4K versions on Avatar 1 or Avatar 2. And the 3D version is definitely not going to get a high frame rate version, because that's going to be on a two-disc Blu-ray. Obviously, 3D is only 1080p, so 1080p per eye. So that's going to be split up between two discs, very much like Titanic 3D was split up between two discs. And for the folks that are like 3D is totally dead, obviously there's not a lot of movies stateside that's being released in 3D, especially like Marvel. Typically, you would have to import those Marvel 3D releases from Japan, get them on eBay or wherever you guys get them from, or Amazon Japan. You can import them into the States. I think the last movie that came out 3D here in the US, I think was it Alita Battle Angel? Maybe one of the Star Wars movies, but it might have been Alita. But I am excited for that to come out, because I'm a big 3D fan. Unfortunately, the 3D version is only going to get the 7.1 audio, whereas the 4K versions are going to get the Atmos audio. For you standard Blu-ray users out there, the 1080p version is only going to get 5.1 audio. And then also the regular DVD is going to get 5.1 audio. And if we're talking about disc size, once again, the 4K disc is going to be on a 100 gig disc. The standard Blu-ray is going to be on a 50 gig disc. And I believe the DVD is going to be on an 8.5 gig disc. So drastic size differences when you go from DVD to Blu-ray over to 4K. So that is going to be the news for Avatar: The Way of Water in 3D and in 4K, and the 2009 release of Avatar, all coming out on June 20th. 2023. And you can pre-order that for, what is it, $33.99 right now. 3D version, the 3D version also is going for, it's actually going for a little bit more. It's $39.99 if you're going to pre-order it. I'm sure once they come out, the prices will probably drop a little bit once the movies actually do release, because that tends to always happen. So you'll probably see these for like $29.99 or something like that. But that again is coming out June 20th, 2023. I'm excited to check them out for sure, especially the 3D version. I mean, I'm sure the 4K version is going to look pretty much exactly the same as the Kaleidescape version. So if you guys haven't seen the review that I did for the Kaleidescape version, which is 4K Dolby Atmos, definitely check it out. I'll leave a link down below in this video's description. But the question is for you guys, are you more excited for the first Avatar in 4K, the second Avatar in 4K, or Avatar 2 in 3D? Like, which one are you guys most excited for? And how do you think it's going to stack up for you 3D fans out there? Do you think the 3D is going to look better than the first 3D from Avatar 1? Because the first 3D release in Avatar 1 still looks fantastic today. I still watch it a couple times a year. One of my favorite 3D movies of all time is the first Avatar. So definitely leave your comments down below and let me know your thoughts on these new releases coming out on June 20th.